Alright, what's happening, y'all? It's your boy Rico from RicoScores, and the Washington Commanders have finally made their decision. The Washington Commanders have hired Cowboys defensive coordinator Dan Quinn as head coach, and of course it looked like this was the most likely candidate after all of the top guys were gone, and I'm not even going to sugarcoat it. They clearly preferred a Ben Johnson or maybe a Bobby Slowick or definitely a Mike McDonald. They landed on Dan Quinn because otherwise we would have hired him a week ago if this was really the guy that they were going after. But of course, like I said in the previous video, to have the humility to admit, okay, yeah, we messed up, we missed out on our top guys, but let's at least try to get the best guy that fits what we're trying to do moving on forward. They also deserve a little credit for that. That's a little commendable. But of course, again, I do want to emphasize, we clearly missed out on our top targets. But at the end of the day, I do want to break down how he is not Rivera 2.0. We got to get that out the way. And also, we got to talk about how this offensive coordinator hire is going to be the most important now, especially with the number 2 overall pick, a potential top quarterback coming in. Dan Quinn has to hit on offensive coordinator. If he doesn't, this whole thing goes down the drain. I mean, that may honestly be the biggest difference between Dan Quinn and Rivera, whether he can hit on offensive coordinator. Now, of course, he also has less control than Ron Rivera ever had. Like, it's gonna be way less control. He's just here to coach. Adam Peters, Josh Harris, Eugene Shin, all of those guys are running the show as far as player personnel and things like that. And we're already hearing reports about who he may lean towards at offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator as well. And he's also linked to a lot more names as well. So we're going to dive into all of that and more. But before we do, make sure you stiff arm that like button, stiff arm the subscription button, and stiff arm the bell next to that subscription button so you get notification each and every time I release an informative and opinionated video just like this one. Again, I'm going to keep y'all updated on everything going on. So when he's trying to find his offensive coordinator, when he's trying to find his defensive coordinator, when he actually finds them and hires them, we will make videos on that as well. If that takes a while, then I'll probably have enough time to do a video myself breaking down who my top offensive coordinator candidates will be under Dan Quinn, or who my top defensive coordinator candidates will be under a Dan Quinn. So make sure you stay tuned for all of that. And of course, I can't wait to get all of this stuff out the way so we can go ahead and start talking about the draft, free agency, all of that type of stuff. I mean, the Senior Bowl is going on right now. We've been so stuck on figuring out who our head coach was going to be. I haven't even really had a chance to dive into the best players and the biggest standouts so far because I want to do stuff like that. So stay tuned for all of that. But let's go ahead and talk about this. Let's go ahead and get this out the way because I really want to prove to y'all why he's not Rivera 2.0. I'm not excited about the hire. I'm not even gonna say and lie about that, but he is not Rivera 2.0. That's the main point of this video. Let's go ahead and get to it. Let's get it. Alright, so breaking news. Ian Rappaport tweeted, because again, Twitter is now where people report stuff initially. When it comes out on Twitter, that's actually just as real as when it used to come out on newspapers and stuff like that. But either way, Ian Rappaport tweeted, sources, the Commanders have found their new coach as Josh Harris is set to hire Cowboys defensive coordinator Dan Quinn as head coach. Quinn gets his second NFL gig, but not with the Seahawks as many expected. He lands in Washington. Now, let me go ahead and let's get some retrospective points out here before we dive into the positives. And of course, we gotta dive into the negatives as well, which is why I'm not excited about this hire, but there are some positives. And then, of course, we got to talk about how he's not Rivera 2.0, and we got to dive into who we may potentially hire as an offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, and who he's already tied to. There are reports that we may be leaning one direction already and things like that. So we're going to dive into all of that, but let's take a look at some retrospective, some macro views on this, some good and bad at the same time type of views. Shouts out to We Want Dallas, brings up a great point. I don't think Dan Quinn was anyone's first choice, but I trust Josh Harris, I trust Adam Peters, and Quinn is widely respected and should be able to put together a really strong staff. We're going to talk about that throughout this video, that Dan Quinn's name is good in the NFL. His word holds weight. This is the type of guy that can put together a really good staff. Even when we were talking about the top candidates, including Bobby Slowick, Ben Johnson, Mike McDonald, if you throw Dan Quinn into that pile, you could argue that he has the ability to put together the best staff around him. Of course, we all prefer Ben Johnson, the offensive genius, Bobby Slowick, the offensive genius, Mike McDonald, the defensive genius. But at the same time, out of those four names, including Dan Quinn, you could argue he has the best ability with his strong networks, his long line of connections, and with him being widely respected everywhere, that he could put together the best staff as far as offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, assistant coaches, and things like that. So, of course, new owner, new GM, new head coach, most cap space in the NFL, number 2 overall pick, 5 top 100 picks. We should still be very optimistic. We may not love the hire. I mean, there's a lot of people that actually do love the hire, but a lot of us, including me, are not big fans of the hire. But I don't think this is just a throw the whole franchise away type of thing. It's not that at all. Shouts out to Chris Cooley for his points. Here are my initial thoughts. It's disappointing they couldn't land one of the top guys. Quinn isn't a bad coach, but it's far from a home run hire. This is an extremely safe move, and I didn't want a safe head coach. It was time to try something new. I completely agree with all of that. He's not a bad coach. Now, schematically, we're going to get into that. His defenses look great until the lights are at their brightest. For some reason, when it matters the most, his defenses just suddenly forget how to play defenses. His teams just in general fold. I mean, him and the Falcons got that same gene. They were perfect for each other. And that's where a 28-3 comes from. When you have a Dan Quinn who just looks funny in the light, and the Falcons, who historically as a franchise look funny in the light, when those two meet up in the same place, it just seems like 28-3 was basically destined to happen. So some of that was also his fault as well, but at the same time, he's not a bad coach, and we're going to talk about this when we separate him from Ron Rivera, about how different he is, even just purely X's and O's wise, how his defenses can lead the NFL in turnovers when Ron Rivera was the most safe, conservative, defensive-minded type of guy ever. Him and Jack Del Rio formed the most conservative, play off 10 yards, but still below coverages defense possible. You don't have to worry about that with Dan Quinn. Again, he's not Mike McDonald. He's not Ben Johnson. He's not Bobby Slowick. But one thing he has more than all of those other guys is experience and the ability to put together a great staff through his connections around the NFL. And players love him. We're going to talk about it a little bit later, but Micah Parsons even said, hey man, wherever he goes, I may go whenever I'm able to leave the Cowboys. Shouts out to Grant Paulson for this one. For the people who have feared this all along, yes, this is for myself as well. Here's how you can talk yourself into feeling better. Dan is gone. Josh Harris is way better. That's automatic. That's how things are just already different. This is going to be a Josh Harris-led organization rather than a Dan Snyder one. Regardless of who we hire as a head coach, that's big time. Also, you got a GM who can find talent. Adam Peters was arguably the best candidate available. And even outside of just candidates, even guys that are already GMs and president of football operations, you could argue Adam Peters is the best talent evaluator, especially late round talent evaluator there is in the entire NFL, no matter of title, no matter of team. And also, don't forget, my boy Eugene Shin is here as well as the top analytics guy, and you could easily give him a lot of credit for building what once was a number 1 seed Miami Dolphins, number 1 seed Jacksonville Jaguars, and number 1 seed Baltimore Ravens at some point late in this regular season. Now, the Jaguars and Dolphins, I don't know what happened. They just folded it away and collapsed towards the end of the regular season. And then I don't know what the Ravens did in the playoffs right there, especially in the AFC Conference Championship game. But you could argue that Eugene Shin analytics have helped mold those teams into the top contenders that they were this season. The Ravens even admitted that even since Eugene Shin has been gone for a couple of years, that they still use a lot of his analytical models to base a lot of their decisions on, as far as personnel and decision making, like fourth downs and things like that. I've already done a full breakdown of Eugene Shin. I'm not going to sit here and break him down right now, but just know that we have a lot of elite minds in the front office right now between Adam Peters and Eugene Shin. Dan Quinn really just has to come here and coach. Also, a thing you should be excited about, of course, is quarterback at number 2 is coming. Peters is an exceptional talent evaluator. If he hits on quarterback at 2 and crushes drafts and free agents in the future, having a Quinn-like head coach can work. Is it ideal? No. but the key will be the quarterback being great and drafting well. I completely agree there. Also, Grant Paulson goes on to say the biggest problem the Commanders will have selling this is that Quinn is a lot like Ron Rivera. They may not be the same guy, but they could be found in the same aisle 3 feet apart at the grocery store. Defensive-minded, player-friendly, well-liked, leader of men types. Both had middling success in NFC South first go round and got to the Super Bowl that time. And oh boy, I know fans are going to be livid the first time they hear Dan Quinn say, "Be where your feet are." Whoo, that's going to bring up a lot of Ron Rivera PTSD, man. I'm just going to go ahead and give you that warning now. Be prepared to hear him say stuff like that. Woo-wee. But we're going to talk about how he's not Ron Rivera 2.0 very soon, but we got to get that out the way. And Grant Paulson also points out good things about the Dan Quinn hire. Again, him not being a big fan of Dan Quinn, same thing with me. Just want to give you that point of view before he dives into these positives, because a lot of this is us convincing ourselves that this is a better hire than it may actually even be. But still, players love him. You're weakening the Cowboys by taking away their defensive coordinator. He's a great defensive mind, and people like him. Now, it kind of sucks that that's pretty much where it generally ends right there. But again, we're going to dive into more. Also, remember, Adam Peters said that the thing he cared the most about when looking for a head coach was leadership. I think that was the political answer, because they clearly definitely preferred an X's and O's genius type of guy, but he sure got himself a leader. I mean, if anything, he probably jinxed himself right there, which is hilarious. Now let's talk about stats. As a defensive coordinator in Seattle for 2 seasons, Dan Quinn's Seahawks finished first in yards allowed and points allowed. And even with like the Cowboys, he took them from bad to great. In 3 seasons as the Cowboys defensive coordinator, Dan Quinn's defense is ranked top 10 each year in points allowed and twice led the NFL in takeaways. So that's one of the biggest reasons he is not Ron Rivera 2.0. Ron Rivera's defenses never got takeaways. Him and Jack Del Rio, when they were together here for the Commanders, we were always dead last or bottom 3, bottom 5 in takeaways. It just seemed like, and they went out of their way to try to draft a takeaway guy in Emmanuel Forbes by forcing it. Even with Christian Gonzalez there, Deontay Banks there, they forced it. They were like, well, we can't get turnovers, let's go get a turnover guy. And we still didn't get turnovers. Dan Quinn knows how to get turnovers through his coaches and his X's and O's, and not necessarily by like the player that they draft. Dan Quinn's not gonna draft Emmanuel Forbes because he had all of these interceptions in college. And even though I still hope that Emmanuel Forbes works out, that's not the type of decision that a Dan Quinn would make. He would hire the right guys for his defense, and then he'll coach them up to get turnovers, not try to bring in a player that has a propensity to get turnovers and just hoping that that magically fixes your turnover problem. But boy, one thing I do want to point out is that when them lights are the brightest, Dan Quinn's defenses just seem to look crazy in the light. But one thing we do have to talk about, and this is coming from a Seattle Seahawks blogger, when he was saying that, yeah, he prefers Mike Macdonald as a candidate, but this is why Dan Quinn is still potentially a good candidate. Now, they ended up hiring Mike Macdonald, so I'm pretty sure this writer is super excited. But either way, he did a whole article breaking down why Dan Quinn could potentially be a good hire for the Seahawks, which is, in our point of view right now that he's the Commanders head coach, worthy of a listen and a read, because he said nobody has hired a better staff out of these top candidates. As excited as I am about the potential of Mike Macdonald as a candidate, there are real questions about who he would bring aboard to fill his staff out, given his short tenure in the league and heavy overlap with Jim Harbaugh, who will also be filling out a staff. Pete Carroll was here for 14 years, for the Seattle Seahawks, and hired tons of coordinators and assistants during that time. His track record was pretty awful. None of his offensive coordinators went on board to become head coaches, even though I like Shane Waldron a lot, who just became the Bears offensive coordinator. So it seems like once he finally got it right, now he's fired. You waited too late. Now Shane Waldron would have been in your corner as to, oh, okay, maybe Pete Carroll can finally hire offensive coordinators, but it took you way too long. The only defensive coordinators who went on to become head coaches were Gus Bradley and Dan Quinn, who both came to Seattle as part of more junior staff, not even Pete Carroll's. Robert Saleh and Dave Canales are the only other guys on staff who went on to become head coaches. Quinn assembled more coaching talent in his first season as a head coach than Carroll did in his 14 years combined. That's not just about Carroll. The crew Quinn pulled together was one of the best in the NFL over the last decade. His first hire was Kyle Shanahan as an offensive coordinator. It seems silly now, but Shanahan was not widely recognized as an offensive genius genius then that he is now. He had been let go in Cleveland after the offense finished 23rd in the NFL. Also, again, like Logan Paulson said on the podcast with Craig Hoffman, here's Craig Hoffman bringing that up through a tweet. After he failed in Atlanta, Quinn immediately started looking at what he could do differently the next time that he was a head coach. It's being reported by Logan Paulson himself that Dan Quinn called him and potentially others to ask, where did I go wrong? Like, everything that I did wrong, please let me know. Be completely truthful. Be completely transparent. Do not hold back. Be as blunt as possible. Where did I go wrong? Where could I have gone better for us to not just completely fall off a cliff? To go from being in the Super Bowl up 28-3 to just completely being sorry for my remaining couple of years and a half as a head coach for the Falcons, because he got fired mid-season. And I can respect that. That's one thing that I don't know. I just don't see Ron Rivera necessarily doing. He gets fired and he's kind of like, yeah, I'm chilling. We'll figure it out later. And I mean, that's not even anything against Ron Rivera. It's just other coaches just don't do that. I mean, that's like the first time I've ever heard reported a coach doing something like that, just period. So that's one way that Dan Quinn is different from Ron Rivera. He's able to go above and beyond and be humble enough to just straight up ask people, man, I'm sorry that everything went the way that they did. What could I have done better in any way possible to make things better, for just in case I end up becoming a head coach somewhere else again? And so Craig Hoffman continues to say, we'll find out over the next few years how well he did in that search, but that introspection makes him not Ron Rivera 2.0 just from that alone. Very different person. Also, shouts out my boy Disco for pointing this out. The selling point, Grant, is that you have one of the top personnel men in the NFL picking the players. He just gets to coach. Something that Ron Rivera never did, at least with this organization. And that takes me to one of my biggest points. That it's not even just Ron Rivera versus Dan Quinn. Again, it's Josh Harris and Adam Peters versus Dan Snyder and Martin Mayhew and all of that stuff that we had going on. And Ron Rivera himself. Because Ron Rivera even said it on the way to getting fired late this regular season, that this is the most fun that he's finally actually had being here in Washington and things like that, because now this is the first time he's really focusing on coaching only. He said that as if it wasn't his idea and his choice to have all of that power, but the main thing is that Ron Rivera has so much personnel power that you could easily argue that Ron Rivera, the GM, was getting in the way of Ron Rivera, the head coach. His GMing was not good at all, and that's what held us back more than anything else. Yeah, his coaching wasn't the best, but I felt like time management bad, all of that type of stuff, use of timeouts, whether to go for it on fourth down or not, and that's all of that is where Eugene Shin comes in. So he handles that, and then on the personnel side, we got Adam Peters for draft, free agency, and things like that. We have all bases covered. Dan Quinn literally just has to come here and coach. That's it. And then, of course, he's going to handle the defense, and you can trust his defense, again, up to a certain point when the lights are at its brightest. Maybe the defensive coordinator can be the difference between that Dan Quinn and hopefully the Dan Quinn that we have and the defenses that we hope we have. Because one thing about it, when Dan Quinn is your coach, you're going to be a playoff contender at the very least, especially X's and O's wise, especially defensively. But the offensive coordinator, if we get that hire right, the sky's the limit, honestly, because if that guy can handle the offense, he can develop this quarterback we're potentially going to get at the number 2 overall pick. And Dan Quinn just lets him run the whole offense. Again, Adam Peters running the personnel decisions, draft, free agency, stuff like that. Eugene Shin is running the analytics, whether we go for it on fourth down, all of that type of stuff, and even analytically, who we should we prioritize tight ends, should we prioritize running backs and things like that. And then Dan Quinn literally just has to be the motivator and the defensive guy. That's it. That's all you do. You're not Ron Rivera. You're not coming here to run the entire show. You're literally just here to coach defense. I think this can work. Now, I'm going to say this over and over again because I already know people are going to keep trying to say that, oh, now you suddenly love the hire now that Dan Quinn is officially the head coach. But again, I'm not excited about the hire. I'm just breaking down why it can definitely work. I still wish that we would have gotten one of those other top candidates, especially like a Bobby Slowick. I was super excited about that. But now that we didn't, you could argue this is the best that we could do. And again, the main point of this video is to break down why this can work and how this can work, looking at Dan Quinn's positives, things like that. But of course, we're going to take a look at his negatives as well. But Mitchell Tisler also brings up a great point. Dan Quinn is the anti-Rivera when it comes to X's and O's. Look at his defenses in Seattle and Dallas. They created turnovers and were creative in using all-world players. Micah Parsons, Cam Chancellor. Obviously, the offensive coordinator is super important, but these two guys guys are not the same at all, which again, when we're talking about control, we're talking about coaching style, all of that, Dan Quinn is nowhere near really a Ron Rivera 2.0. I see the similarities. They're going to say a lot of the same quotes. Be where your feet are. They're both very likable defensive-minded head coaches, motivators, leaders of men, things like that. But at the end of the day, man, when we're talking X's and O's, Dallas's defense and the Seattle Seahawks Legion of Boom defense, which again, Dan Quinn was the orchestrator and the genius behind, are completely different from what Ron Rivera and Jack Del Rio were building here. Going from super conservative on 3rd and 5 playing 10 yards off and still somehow allowing blown coverages 50 yards down the field for easy touchdowns, receivers open by at least 10 yards or more. You're going from that to a super strategic and creative defensive coordinator that knows how to get the most out of his players and has guys looking better than they actually are, because he's a great defensive mind. He is a better defensive mind than Ron Rivera is, plain and simple. Our defense at the very least is going to be schematically better than when you hire Dan Quinn as a head coach. At the very least, that's going to be better compared to what we've dealt with the past few years. So again, if you hate blown coverages, you should be happy that Dan Quinn is now your head coach instead of Ron Rivera. Also, Mitchell Tisler brings up another good point. Quinn coming in without player personnel control is also a huge difference. If you trusted Peters a month ago, then you should trust him now. He brought in a great leader with proven success on the defensive side of the ball and a track record of hiring good staffs. So those are reasons to be optimistic. But Tan Top Podcast also bring up a great point. Dan Quinn took over the Falcons team that went 10-22 in the 2 years prior to his arrival, and then immediately went 8-8 his first season, 11-5 with a Super Bowl appearance in his second season. Of course, 28-3, all of that type of happened. And then Shanahan left and they went 10-6, and then the wheels fell off. They lost in the divisional round. After that, they went 7-9, 7-9, 4-12, and then fired. So Dan Quinn seems like the type of guy that offensive coordinator hire matters immensely. Like, he has to hit on that. Without Kyle Shanahan, he's been bad, but with Kyle Shanahan, they were making something work. He was able to turn that Falcons team around very quickly. The Falcons team was averaging 5-11 seasons before he got there, and immediately when they got there, they went 8-8, and then within the second year, they went 11-5 into the Super Bowl. Like, man, we would love something like that. Now, of course, we wouldn't love to go up 28-3 and end up losing, but those are very special circumstances. I mean, I feel like one thing you could also argue about Dan Quinn, that a guy that is lost after being up 28-3 in a Super Bowl, you would expect him to be the last guy that would ever allow that to happen again. That's a very tough lesson to learn. That's a very big scar to wear on you. So if there was one coach I could bet money on to never go up 28-3 and end up losing again, it is Dan Quinn, man. I mean, if there's anybody. But still, man, we would be, if I just told you plain and simple, whoever we hired as head coach would get us to go 8-8 the first season and then 11-5 in a Super Bowl appearance in the second season, you would be ecstatic if that's all I told you. But I do want to make sure I emphasize that offensive coordinator matters a lot. We're going to talk about that later in this video, but that right there is why you could tell it's super important, because as soon as Kyle Shanahan left, literally the wheels fell off. So hopefully he can hire a great head coach the first time, but also with any defensive-minded head coach, which is including Mike McDonald, you have to be prepared to be able to hire multiple offensive coordinators, multiple great ones, because the first one, if he's good enough, like a Kyle Shanahan or even like Dave Canales for the Buccaneers, Bobby Slowick, what it looked like at first for the 1 year with the Texans, teams are trying to steal that guy away and make them a head coach immediately. So you need to be ready to hire another great offensive coordinator within like the next year or two, probably. I mean, that's what happened to him. Kyle Shanahan leaves after 2 years, so we'll see what happens here. We still got to hit on the first one. You got to hit on the first one, because then nobody's going to take him away if he's not good. But then you got to also be prepared to hit on the second one as well. And then also remember, Cowboys linebacker Micah Parsons, who I said we should trade up for in that draft, and now look how great he's been. As far as Dan Quinn's future, he said, quote, he might take me with him. You never know. This was January 11th. He said that literally, like, he loves Dan Quinn, and players love Dan Quinn. And I think if you want to compare Dan Quinn to Ron Rivera as far as players liking him, one thing you can point out is that Dan Quinn's love goes a little bit further. Yeah, players really like Ron Rivera, but players love Dan Quinn. I feel like out of coaches, candidates that players love to play for the most, you could argue, was probably Raheem Morris, who got hired by the Falcons, and ex-Falcons head coach / of course, Cowboys defensive coordinator, Dan Quinn. So, hey, man, because Jalen Ramsey was on the internet taking up for Raheem Morris left and right for the past, week and a half. Mike Tomlin took up for him, a couple of weeks ago as well. And you see guys like Micah Parsons doing the same thing for Dan Quinn and basically saying that wherever Dan Quinn goes, I may end up going. Now, he may be joking a little bit, but that just goes to show how much players love him. Now, before we start to dive into a lot more positives and what Dan Quinn needs to do from today on and why offensive coordinator matters so much, let's go ahead and point out some of the negatives. And I feel like there's a lot of negatives we could dive into, but the one I want to point out the most is how much he struggled against Shanahan offenses. The guy that he brought in as his offensive coordinator that helped lead him to a Super Bowl. Again, that was a collaboration because Kyle Shanahan, again, from his stint with the Cleveland Browns, showed you that he couldn't do it on his own. Kyle Shanahan needed Dan Quinn, but it's also very obvious that Dan Quinn needed Kyle Shanahan. And ever since Kyle Shanahan left Dan Quinn has struggled mightily against Kyle Shanahan offenses because Dan Quinn's Dallas defenses have been among the league's best overall, but that hasn't stopped the Shanahan tree from dicing him up. When it comes to EPA per drop back allowed, higher equals worse by Dallas. San Francisco 2021, 47th percentile. Green Bay 2022, 82nd. San Francisco 2022, 56th. San Francisco 2023, 98th. Miami 2023, 67th. And Green Bay 2023, 100th, which was the playoff game. So when it comes to Kyle Shanahan offenses, Dan Quinn's great defenses just seem to look terrible. So maybe it's not a look funny in the light thing. It's just whenever you're going against a Kyle Shanahan coaching tree coach offense, then that's when Dallas's defense just completely wets the bed and lays an egg. So we just got to avoid those. And also, how about we just focus on what are we doing wrong when we go against Kyle Shanahan? And let's figure out how to counter that, please. So outside of Kyle Shanahan offenses, Dan Quinn's defenses have been elite. I mean, literally one of the best in the NFL. But when he goes against Kyle Shanahan, it gets ugly, and that's scary. Now, luckily, we have Adam Peters, who helped build that team that Kyle Shanahan has. So hopefully Adam Peters can work that same magic and build the exact counter to a Kyle Shanahan team. I know how I built the 49ers for Kyle Shanahan. Now let's build the team that can literally counter that directly. Yeah, I built this fire for Kyle Shanahan. Now let's build this water to beat Kyle Shanahan. So if there was any GM that could potentially help Dan Quinn do that, it is an Adam Peters. But at the end of the day, again, I'm going to trust Adam Peters and Josh Harris on this one from now on. Just plain and simple. We can't be that excited about hiring Adam Peters and then turn around and immediately hate his first head coach and hiring. We just can't. We do have the right to question it, though. We easily, for sure, have the right to question it. I'm not telling anybody not to question it, but don't immediately just let this affect whether you go to games or not, whether you support the team or not, whether you watch the games or not. Don't let it do that. At least give them this first opportunity, man. But again, I want to reemphasize you have the right to question, especially with how all of this went down, because they clearly missed out on their top targets. Because if Dan Quinn was really your guy, you would have hired him at least a week ago. So this is an ugly process. From the PR side of things, this looks bad, but do not give up on the team just because of that. We were that excited about Adam Peters, and a lot of us, mostly me, were very excited about getting Eugene Shin. We've been saying that Josh Harris has been shooting 100% from the field so far with all of the hires and decisions he's made. So even though this Dan Quinn one is the least exciting, I don't necessarily think it's a bad one. And again, for reasons I've already stated, Dan Quinn is dependent on a lot of factors, but I feel like we could trust that this front office and coaching staff can help mitigate those bad factors and save him from hurting himself and doing himself bad and doing everything right around him to allow him to just literally do what he does best, and that's lead a top defense in the NFL as long as they're not going against a Kyle Shanahan offense. Now with a head coach like this, you have to get the coordinators right. You have to. Like defensive coordinator included, but especially offensive coordinator, especially with the number 2 overall pick, you have to hit on those like almost home run level. Again, I'm giving you the reasons why Dan Quinn can work out, but I'm still not one of those people that's very excited about this hire. I'm going to say it over and over again. I'm not a big fan of Dan Quinn. And one of the main reasons why is that you have to hit on offensive coordinator. And I feel like the same thing applies to Mike Macdonald. Offensive coordinator is a very big and very telling hire. Like, it is going to affect so much of your future, whether you hit on offensive coordinator or not. But at the same time, when it comes to Dan Quinn, you literally have to, man, because Grant Paulson brings up a great point. Dan Quinn was 43-42 in his first stint as a head coach with the Falcons. He got to the Super Bowl the year Matt Ryan flourished as an MVP under Kyle Shanahan, but he went 24-29 after his departure. The offensive coordinator hire becomes pertinent here, especially with the number 2 overall pick almost certainly being a quarterback. You can argue that offensive coordinator is more important than a head coach, especially at this point. Yeah, Dan Quinn, cool, motivator, defensive guy, all of that type of stuff. But who's going to lead this offense in a passing league? Right now, like I always say, that this league is straight up offense, and that's it. Like, the NFL is very blatant with it. They're not even trying to hide it, because offense leads the points, points lead the views, views lead the money. So the NFL prefers better offenses. The way that the rules are set up literally reflect that the NFL prefers for offenses to beat defenses. A great offense at this point in time is always going to beat a great defense. Well, usually more times than not. Back in the 80s, defenses would dominate offenses. Now offenses dominate defenses, literally just by the way that the rules are set up. Like, please score offenses. That's what the NFL is telling you. So we got to hit on offense. Our offense has to be, doesn't matter how elite of a defensive coordinator Dan Quinn can be. Doesn't matter how elite of a motivator he could be, because you could just be out here motivating losers. But we got to get this offense right, man. In a passing league, we got to hit on that, man. So now that the head coach's search is over, who will be Dan Quinn's staff? And you got to think about the fact that maybe Eric Bieniemy stays as offensive coordinator. I doubt it. But that does, with us hiring a defensive-minded head coach, which it looked like we were destined to do since days ago because there were no offensive-minded head coaches available, it looks like Eric Bieniemy is more likely to stay. But from reports that I'm seeing everywhere right now, it doesn't sound very likely. So Jonathan Jones tweeted out some potential contenders in Washington. Clint Kubiak as offensive coordinator and Joe Witt as defensive coordinator could be options. Again, I'm going to do deep dives into those coordinators in separate videos. But that's for like later tonight or tomorrow or something like that, especially if we don't hire a guy as soon as possible. Also, Nikki Javala, when talking about Clint Kubiak being a potential name for the offensive coordinators, of course, he's currently the passing game coordinator for the 49ers. He has ties to Adam Peters and Kyle Shanahan, who was Quinn's offensive coordinator in Atlanta. So again, Dan Quinn's defenses do not know how to stop Kyle Shanahan offenses. They can shut down anybody else, but when it comes to his former counterpart, I mean, it's literally like your protege or your best hand, your right-hand man, your best friend is your only counter. Everybody else you can dominate, but for some reason, the guy that was once closest to you is now your biggest nemesis and always gets the better of you, basically. And anybody that comes from his coaching tree gets the better of you. But maybe you can find the next Kyle Shanahan and the Clint Kubiak to be your offensive coordinator, so that now, again, once he had Kyle Shanahan, he was to the Super Bowl within 2 years. Maybe Clint Kubiak can bring that same thing. Maybe we can find a way to keep him here long term rather than allowing him to go elsewhere to become a head coach. And again, I trust Adam Peters, if anybody, to build a team that can directly counter Kyle Shanahan more than anybody else. Because not only is he arguably the best talent evaluator in the entire NFL, no matter title, no matter team, but also, again, he helped build the fire of the 49ers. I have faith that if anybody can build the water that can counter him, it's him that knows them inside and out. I mean, again, for the reason that Kyle Shanahan offenses are so great against Dan Quinn defenses is because Kyle Shanahan knows Dan Quinn inside and out. He knows all of the tendencies, all of that type of stuff. He's basically in his head, which is why he's able to counter them, and all of his coaching tree partners are able to counter him as well. I feel like Adam Peters, the same thing. In Kyle Shanahan's head, knows him inside and out. What does he hate? That's what we're going to try to build over here, and I'm down for it. If Dan Quinn could ever finally step up to a Kyle Shanahan offense and shut it down, it's with Adam Peters as his GM. And again, Clint Kubiak, potentially as offensive coordinator, would be interesting. Now it's being reported that Joe Witt, the Cowboys passing game coordinator and secondaries coach, is expected to be a part of the Commanders coaching staff. We got to see if he'll actually bring him on as a defensive coordinator. But apparently, from reports I'm seeing right now, expect him to come over to Washington from Dallas with Dan Quinn. We don't know the exact title. We don't know the role. We don't know the exact responsibilities, but expect him to basically be a part of Dan Quinn's staff. Again, I'm not saying he's going to be our defensive coordinator, but just be on the lookout for that. Also, Nikki Javala pointed out potential defensive coordinator candidates for Quinn: Joe Witt Jr., who we just talked about, Joe Cullen, Chiefs D-line coach, and George Edwards, Bucs outside linebackers coach and former Washington defensive coordinator, potentially. Also, Mark Bullock has a whole chart of coaches with direct links to Dan Quinn, and you would think guys like Chris Richard and Al Harris get long looks. Haven't included Kyle Shanahan, Matt LaFleur, and Mike McDaniels, but he had all those three on staff in Atlanta and could conceivably try and add from their staffs. So again, like a Clint Kubiak. So you have Darrell Bevell from the Dolphins, who I've been screaming to bring over for the past 2 years now as like an offensive coordinator, as something. Just let him do whatever it takes. Then you have Pat McPherson, the Seahawks tight end, Nate Carroll, the Seahawks senior offensive assistant. I mean, it just goes on and on. I mean, the most notable names, you have Mike LaFleur. If you want to see that, you can see that on the screen right now. There's so many options. Like that boy Mark Bullock, man, make sure you follow him on Twitter. Follow his Substack. Is worth every penny. He does film sessions and everything. This is a very great detailed list that you can tell he put time and research into this. So as you're seeing on the screen right now, there you go. Remember, the staff that's around the head coach is always important, but with a guy like Dan Quinn, it's probably even more important than it normally is. But we got to remember that he put together one of the best staffs of all time when you look back with the Falcons. Just like how we had that 2013 curse, he has a lot of the same people because he had Matt LaFleur, Mike McDaniels, Raheem Morris, and Jeff Ulbrich all on that same staff. One of the best assistant staffs out there doing it, and a lot of those guys went on to be great. So Dan Quinn, if anything, could put together a great staff. I'm hoping he can repeat that same success here. We'll see how that goes. Now, Nikki Javala brings up a great point. Per NFL sources, no NFL coordinator interviews can be requested, granted, or occur for assistant coaches in the Super Bowl until after the postseason. So we have to wait until after the postseason to even potentially even talk to guys from the 49ers or the Chiefs, just to go ahead and give you that heads up. So if you want to Clint Kubiak, you're going to have to wait until after the Super Bowl. And maybe it shows that we're leaning towards a Clint Kubiak as an offensive coordinator, because if we wait until after the Super Bowl to hire a guy, because otherwise you would just go ahead and hire a guy. The Super Bowl isn't for like another couple of weeks. And if you want to just go ahead and hit the ground running, which is the more than likely option, the option that actually makes the most sense, get your offensive coordinator here as soon as possible. Go ahead and get your staff together as soon as possible so we can focus on the Senior Bowl, and we can get to the combine and pro days and things like that. You would want to do it as soon as possible so y'all can go ahead and get to work and start to have meetings on what's the direction we're trying to go with building this team and things like that. So if they wait for the next couple of weeks till after the Super Bowl, you can already tell they're leaning towards a Clint Kubiak, because otherwise you would just go ahead and hire the guy as soon as possible. And even though we may not love our head coaching hire, at the very least we can focus on the Senior Bowl now. Speaking of the Senior Bowl, I'm just very excited about the fact that we are no longer the only team in the NFL at the Senior Bowl without a head coach. Now we have our head coach, and we may not love our head coach, but at least we have him, and now we can focus on the more fun things. Again, I've been keeping y'all updated on everything going on with this head coach and such and things like that, but that is not my thing. I'm so excited that we can now focus on team building, draft, Senior Bowl, pro day, combine, free agency, all of that type of stuff. I'm getting back to mock drafts, all of that. Of course, I'm gonna keep y'all updated on offensive coordinator candidates, defensive coordinator candidates, and then when we hire those guys, I'll do full breakdowns on those guys as well. But now we can start to shift our focus into team building, which is my favorite. That's my bag. I'm super excited. But yeah, man, that's the end of this video. Please get in the comment section. Let me know how you feel about everything discussed in this video. Please stiff arm that like button, stiff arm the subscription button, stiff arm the bell next to that subscription button so you get notification each and every time I release an informative and opinionated video just like this one. Of course, let me know how you feel about everything discussed in this video. Let me know how you feel about this Dan Quinn hire. And if you didn't love the hire, I mean, again, I still don't love the hire, but if you're one of those people that hated it, and if I was able to give you some positive sides of it, the glass half full side, like y'all know I'm known to do, that's my thing. I'm Mr. Glass Half Full. If I was able to just give you a little bit of hope and to convince you a little bit that this could potentially work out, please let me know that in the comment section. Or if you still just absolutely hate them and feel like the world is falling apart, let me know that as well. Whether you agree or disagree with me, please get in the comment section and completely voice your opinions. I'm gonna try my best to try to read and reply to every comment, especially with something like this. Even if you type out a whole essay, I'm gonna try my best to try to read everybody's opinions, because I'm very curious, because y'all may bring up points that I didn't even think about that I didn't even bring up in this video that may make me a smarter football fan and a smarter analyst. So let me know whether you agree or disagree with me, especially if you disagree with me. Let me know why and all of that type of stuff, because I'm very curious. I'm always looking to become a smarter fan. So even if I'm wrong, let me know. Please, I appreciate y'all. Stay patient. I'm working on exclusive film sessions for the channel members only and things like that. I appreciate all the support. I'm gonna catch y'all later. I'm out.